Okay, so you might notice that we're not on the bench today. We're actually in the outside. It's a beautiful day out here, and we've got a project that pretty much is about as far from electronics as you can get. This is a little 7 horsepower Kohler motor that's running a hydraulic pump. It's a small little self-contained HPU, and it hasn't ran for the better part of 2 years. So before we even try to crank it, we'll just go straight into draining the gas and getting the carburetor pulled apart, cleaning it up. 99% sure the battery's dead. However, I do have a charger with jump start capabilities, so we'll get that cranked up to turn the motor over. So hopefully we won't have to do any hand cranking at all. But I figured this would be a good little thing to go through to kind of show, you know, maybe if you've got an old motor that hasn't ran in a while, or one that's just running badly, you know, kind of the steps you take to get these things back online. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do before I even try to do anything else at all is I'm actually going to pull the spark plug, which is here, to open up the cylinder, and I'm going to spray a little bit of penetrating oil in there. Not much, just a little tiny bit. Just in case we've had some moisture build up or something in there. It'll kind of help just make things a little bit easier on the engine. We're not going to put so much that we hydrolock anything, so there's no need to worry about that. We're just going to put just a little spray just to let it start kind of creeping around that cylinder to where everything is kind of pre-lubricated whenever we go to actually roll this thing over. Plug actually looks really good. They said that this motor has really low hours on it, but it just hasn't ran in so long that it I don't think it's gonna let us crank it up. So let's see if we can get in there in the first shot. Not too bad. Okay, so we're not gonna roll the engine over at this point. We're actually just gonna let that sit. In the meantime, we can start pulling apart the air cleaner, which should give us a lot easier access to the carburetor. Start off by getting the filter off. Wow, and you can really see that this engine does have some low hours on it, or at least was ran in really, really clean air. Because that filter is almost immaculate. It looks like we need to take off these 2 nuts, and those are going to be some torque screws, so hang on a second. Great thing about these small engines is that most of them can be pulled apart with pretty much just a 10 and a 13 millimeter socket. I mean, obviously you're going to have some oddball things like Torx on there, but for the most part, if you carry around a 10 and a 13 millimeter socket, and an 8 is a pretty handy one to have too. You can do a lot with these engines. I'm also using my air filter cover as my fastener holder. Be very careful doing that you get all the fasteners back on the engine, because that will definitely give you a bad day if a screw drops into your carburetor. Alright, I hope this comes out clear. My camera doesn't focus really well, but I'm going to kind of just show you how to remove these. They're really simple, but you do have to actually back the idle screw all the way off. Whenever I first started working on engines and things like that, I used to have a really big problem actually remembering how all these components go back together and things like that. And eventually I got to a point where you kind of know naturally where things fit in. And whenever I started filming these kind of things, I actually noticed that I kind of lost a little bit of that ability, because I always knew that I could just go back and watch the film. So I'm trying to concentrate more on actually consciously remembering where components go. So every once in a while, if you see me just kind of stalling and really looking at things, it's because I'm memorizing how things went. And it looks like now the only fuel shutoff is actually going to be here, and we need to actually remove that to do the carburetor cleaning job. So we can either clamp this tube off, or we can go ahead and drain the gas. I think we'll go ahead and drain the gas, so I'm going to go get a container to do that with. We're going to use these needle nose vice grips with some fuel hose stuck on them, just as a little pinch off, just to give us a little bit better control over when we get fuel out of this thing. And we'll use some needle nose pliers for these clamps here, just to pull them on out. Spray a little bit of penetrating oil on that hose and bar. And then you want to just real easy give it a little bit of a twist with your pliers. And you should feel it break free, unless it's a really bad hose. There we go. Some really nice yellow looking gas. Alright, we'll get this gas drained away, and I will see you on the tailgate of my truck next. Okay, so we've got the carburetor pulled off, and we're about to start taking it apart. The first thing you kind of want to actually do is, before you really get too deep into it, is just spray it down with some brake cleaner. So I'm going to go off camera for a second and do that. Now, I like to do that just to try to get any kind of loose dust or anything that might get into the carburetor cleaned off right away. And then next up, you could take this drain plug off and drain it, but we're just going to go ahead and pull the bowl and be done with it. But before we do that, I think I'll go get my container again. Actually, we'll just use the lid. I believe this is either going to be the 8 or the 10. Which is right here, and the socket. Man, that one was pretty tight. Wow, gas is not supposed to be green. Once you got the bowl off, this O-ring right here is normally going to be kind of a trouble spot. Most of your carb rebuild kits are going to come with this O-ring. Sometimes this is actually all you really need. If it starts getting dry and cracked, it'll actually suck air in, and it won't allow the carburetor to act properly. So check that first thing, make sure it's in good shape. This one actually looks like it's in really good shape. It didn't stick to the bowl coming out or anything like that. So I feel really good about this ring here. Next up, we'll pull this pin out of the float, which will allow us to remove the float and the needle valve. You can also kind of see another good reason to catch the fuel coming out of the carburetor is it'll let you see that there is some trash and stuff in the fuel. So we need to make sure that we really clean that out whenever we get in this thing. Try not to flip your float over and lose the needle valve. This one actually has a keeper spring on it. And you'll also go ahead and inspect just the tip of that needle. I don't know if you can see it in the camera or not, but just you're looking for any grooves or any kind of wear that's showing up on it. And this one looks really, really good. We won't actually remove that needle from the float. You can also see on this float, highlight out the camera, will pick it up, but there's the top is kind of a whitish color, and then I can almost see a water line here showing that this thing sat in fuel for a long time. But it's not full of fuel. Sometimes you'll have floats that actually have fuel in them that are leaking. Those need to be changed out. This one, we're good. This is a brass seated carburetor, meaning that there's no little, sometimes they'll have a Viton little seals in there. Normally your brass ones are going to be okay if it's a low hour motor. You don't really have to worry about it. Okay, let's go ahead and pull off the the little fuel separator bowl. This is actually going to be kind of a filter, I believe, in here. And this is where I expect to find the worst of the worst. So let's dump that out. There's a little bit of trash, not near, I've seen way worse. But bearing in mind there's a screen in here, and that screen could be catching a lot of trash, we'll actually backwash it with brake cleaner. We'll do that off camera again. Just to kind of show what I'm doing, I'm actually just taking the can and I'm keeping it kind of close. Make sure you wear safety glasses and try to keep this thing pointed to where it goes in a safe direction. And I'm just putting small jets into the screen, and I'm watching this outlet to make sure that I have flow coming back out of it. My mistake, I should have clarified that the outlet will actually come out of this, and then this is going to be the filter. So we're backwashing it backwards right now. That will actually have to be pushed through the needle seat. So to do that, we're going to put the straw on. And normally your straw fits pretty tightly in there, into that needle seat, and you can see how we're flooding out that screen. That's exactly what we want to see. And then of course we can, oh, that doesn't look too good. It looks like we might actually have a little clog there. Let's try backwashing it this way. We'll just kind of put the straw into that. Oh, that's a perfect fit. Oh, of course it's clogged. Fuel's off. That's what we want to see right there. Perfect. I think that we'll go ahead and pull the main jet out. On these Kohlers, it's just a flathead. Let me make sure I have the right flathead screwdriver. This one should work. Now, whenever you're pulling these carburetor jets out, remember that they're brass, so you want to push down really, really firmly and make sure you're seated really well into that slot, and then turn. This one actually came out really easily. I'm hoping that as easy as this carburetor is coming apart, it won't give us any problems, and this motor will crank right up whenever we're ready. There we go. So now we're getting into the areas where you'll find your problems. This main jet here and this jet here is more often than not, these little bitty holes in here, these are what's going to kill that carburetor. So first of all, we'll start off with the little main jet here, and we'll just, okay, I can see that it's still not letting stuff through. So we'll use these are torch tip cleaners. You have to be very careful whenever you're using these because they do have some kind of little file grooves on the ends, and they can actually open the jets up on your carburetors. So be really careful. I don't like to find one that fits too tight in there at first, but it does have to actually do a little bit of work, and we can always just go up a size if we find that it's just not working out. It's actually gunked up pretty good. Could use just this is a stainless steel brush, and we'll just scrub it up. Alright, let's hit it again with some brake cleaner. That looks much better. We'll put it up to the light and inspect it. And I think what we'll do is we'll actually take our small screwdriver, small flathead, and we'll just really gently, because I feel like there's more trash in there, we'll just really gently go and just kind of scrape the sides of that thing out. And I can see that there's a little green monster coming out of there. This is the stuff you don't want to come loose and get caught in the jet. So this, you really want to be meticulous about this and get all of that stuff out of there. That looks really good. That means it's time to go dump the memory card and start over. Alright, I hope we're actually recording. We're going to go ahead and move on to this here jet. I forget what all the proper names of them are, but they're all jets, so we'll just call them jets. And the first thing I want to do with this one is try to just see what we get out of it. Doesn't look too bad. Got my safety glasses for a second there. So let's plug off the end just with our finger. That'll kind of be a little weird, but you got to plug one end off with your finger and try not to plug any other holes, and then we actually get a pretty good stream out of there. So I think what we'll do is we'll just see about just kind of running this through that bore and kind of cleaning any little gunk out that might be in there. And give it another little spray. That looks really good. I'm actually taking just one little bristle of the brush is kind of bent, and I'm putting it in these little small holes and giving it kind of a little circular motion. That'll make sure that those are really nice and clean. I can't stress enough that this is the part you really need to pay attention to. Okay. So now we'll take the main body of our carburetor, and if we look in here, we can actually open the throttle plate up too if you want. But if we look in here, we'll see there's a jet here and here, and we'll give those the same kind of treatment. Just backwash them with the brake cleaner, and we're looking just to make sure that we get some outflow from them. Which this one should get on in there. Come right on out of there. Perfect. And this one comes right out the middle. And then we'll actually go ahead and flush that out a little bit. This is actually, if you go through this little, where we pull those main jets out of, you can actually just put the straw through there most of the time and kind of, on you, and actually see it come up into your throttle body bore. So just a little bit of brake cleaner in there just kind of flushes those threads out a little. Okay, let's try to clean this bore up a little bit more. It looks like it's got some crud in there. We're just kind of picking that stuff out of there and then flushing and making sure that it doesn't go in a bad spot. Okay, that looks really good. Whenever you replace this bore, this flat spot is going to be up on the screw side here. They're going to kind of mate together like that. So just drop it in. And you should be able to look in your throttle body bore and actually see that jet sticking up a little bit. Drop that screw jet back in. And then just kind of screw it back in until you'll feel it whenever it'll kind of bottom out. Okay, and once it bottoms out, kind of the same thing. You want to push down hard, but you don't have to put a whole lot of torque on these things. Just a little bit. The reason we want to push down hard is the same reason whenever we're removing it. We don't want to strip it tightening or loosening. So just always push down hard on those things and you'll be okay. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll wash our float off again. Pop that back on. Some carburetors you do have to kind of mess with the float level. This one I don't believe is one of them. It is, however, a little stubborn, so we might have to kind of clean this stuff up a little bit before it'll want to go. Okay, so we'll go ahead and actually remove this needle. And you do that, you just kind of push it in a little bit, and there you go. Be careful because this spring will come off, so you need to make sure you keep an eye on it. And we'll actually get our plastic brush out for this one so we don't tear it up. And we'll just kind of scrub this float up because that discoloration we saw earlier is actually gas that is kind of varnished up. And if we don't get it off now, whenever we start running fresh fuel through the system, the fuel will start getting it off for us, that fresh gas, and it won't completely dissolve it, and next thing you know, you'll go from running great to having clogged jets. So we want to make sure that we get as much of this off as we can. We may try, yeah. Sometimes you may be able to try to break it up a little bit with WD-40 and kind of your fingernails. Yeah, that WD-40 is working really well for this one. But want to make sure you get as much of that stuff off as you can, and then clean it off. We'll actually spray a little bit in that hinge point and make sure it's nice and clean. And then we'll replace our needle seat. A little tricky, but not too bad. There we go. Clicks right on in. Still got our spring. Let's go ahead and, yeah, scrub. We're going to give the whole thing a good scrub with a brush. Just be careful of that O-ring if you leave that O-ring in there. I didn't mention earlier too, you need to check this. There's a little hole that goes crosswise into that pickup tube there. You need to make sure that hole is clean. I have to get in there with the plastic one as best we can. Okay, I think that stuff will be alright. It's coming off as more of a dust instead of flaking off. So if the fuel does pull it off, it'll it should just pass through everything. Thought I lost my hinge pin there for a second. Okay. When you reinstall your float, you just want to make sure that you have free movement, that gravity can operate it. Because this float, gravity is what's going to tell it to drop down and seal that fuel off, or let more in, or whichever way it needs to go. So just be mindful of that, that if that float is sticking, that will give you problems. Okay, the bowl looks pretty good. Alright, I don't want to actually pull this O-ring off because it's giving me really good luck already, and I don't have a carb kit to put in this thing. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to make sure that the rim of this carb bowl is as clean as I can get it. And then we'll put a little bit of O-ring lube just on that flat edge. Not much, just a little thin coating of it. And then we'll set this back on. And when we put our screw in, we won't put our screw too tight. We'll leave it a little loose because we want to make sure we have access to this drain. So we want to make sure that we clock this bowl the right way. So the easiest thing to do is to actually we'll put a little bit of lube on that face too, because there is an O-ring on this particular one. Some of them don't have O-rings, most of them do. And we just want to make sure we get a nice little seal on there. So just finger tight. And same thing with the fuel bowl, the little water separator. We'll put a little bit more on here because we want to get some on the threads too, because those threads can gall up on these things, and that's a big annoyance. That'll just act like a little bit of an anti-seize. Believe it or not, that's all to cleaning a carburetor and not doing a full rebuild if you're just trying to get something running just like that. So we'll go and go through putting this thing back on the motor and getting this tightened up, and hopefully find some fresh gas, put this thing in that engine, and rock and roll. I don't really like doing this, but sometimes you got to. Not that there's anything wrong with doing it, it's just annoying. I don't like annoying things. Alright, that looks much better. I'm really happy with that. Alright, so reassembly is pretty much the reverse of disassembly. We have to put our choke plate back on, our choke handle back on. throttle spring and lever. Well, actually, this is the governor spring and lever. Sometimes these can be tricky to put back on. A lot of times a little pair of pliers is what it calls for, but I think we can do this one without that. Yep. Get that arm back in. Come on, you. Gas line pop back on. Come back. That looks good. And slid back into place. What came next? It was this part. Make sure that that is it. Everything runs correctly. Whenever you're replacing this filter mount, make sure that you get your oil cover breather hose back in right. Two big nuts go here. You don't have to tighten the world out of these nuts. Most of this stuff is just a little past finger tight, you know, maybe a quarter turn or so. It doesn't take a whole lot to hold this stuff in place. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn the motor over a little bit. The spark plug is still out. And what that's going to do is it's going to work some of that penetrating oil around in that cylinder some more. And also, if there's too much in there, if we would have hydrolocked, this will eject it out. So just a few turns, it doesn't take much. And I'm going to go find some fuel. And let's put the filter on top of here. Get the generator cranked up, get the battery charger hooked up, get the spark plug in, and we'll turn this thing over and see how it runs. Alright, so we've got fuel in the tank. We've got our fuel on. Choke is off right now. Spark plug is in. Before I installed the spark plug, I put a little bit of anti-seize on the threads. I just like to do that as a best practice for any time I do any spark plug work. We have our spool valve in neutral, and also this, I don't think the camera's pointing at it, but there's a flow control valve. I have that in the fully open position, so we should be bypassing all of our fluid back into the tank. Throttle we're going to set at about half right now, and it's actually on full, so it's actually kind of hard to work. So we'll spray a little bit of penetrating oil into that throttle linkage to free it up some. We also want to check and make sure that we actually have oil in here, which is really difficult because the sight glass is not too hot, but I do see a line. So we've got oil in the tank so we don't burn the pump up. We've got a key start, and we've got our battery charger set to high start mode. I think that's actually a 200 amp. It's actually 250 amp. So we should have plenty of amperage to crank this little 7 horse. That's all there is to it. Let's get it. Half throttle. Yeah, I think we can lose a little. have to let it run and idle a little while to let all that stuff kind of get flowing again. Looks like it needs new feet. Wants to walk off on its own. I'm checking the pump to see if it's getting warm. If it is, that means that we're bypassing fluid somewhere. But it's staying really cool. So we're just circulating back into the tank right now. That's exactly what we want to do. I know why we're stalling out. We need to readjust that idle screw. I'm going to set the engine RPM to a good idle speed. I'm not going to do that with any kind of tachometer or anything. I'm just doing it by ear. And then we'll start tightening up that idle screw till we hear those RPMs lift a little bit, and then we'll back off until we hear them just barely settle. Hear it lift? I backed up about a quarter turn. Alright guys, the rest is simple. We just put the covers back on and tighten it up. So I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching. I think this will be a really interesting, albeit much different than normal video. So I'll see y'all later.